Saito sioi. Mi estas Hayden Bekhuys kai si tio, mi Masterworks. You may recognize some key words there, such as Masterworks or Hayden Bekhuys, but can anyone here guess what that means, the sentence? Anyone? Finn? Yes. That sentence roughly translates to hello all. I'm Hayden Bekhuys, and this is my Masterworks. What is this language I'm speaking? Well, it's called Esperanto. But what is Esperanto, and where did it come from? More on that later, but at least let me finish my introduction. Hello, I'm Hayden Bekhuys, and this is my presentation on the veins of culture and the impacts of a universal language. This project started when a younger me was just flipping through Google Translate looking at languages, and I noticed a language just under English that caught my eye. It was Esperanto. I knew that name. I knew it from somewhere, but I couldn't track it. And I remember my father telling me about it. It was a universal language that never took off. And the more I read on it, the more interested in it I became. And I slowly refined it to my final topic. But what exactly is Esperanto? Picture this. You're a teenager in the 1860s. Imagine what you'd be thinking about. Imagine what you'd be doing. Maybe you'd be thinking about new inventions like the can opener or the sewing machine. But this man, Ludwig Zamenhof, he had a dream of unity and a dream of peace, a dream where a person living in Russia could interact with a person living in Bolivia while walking down the street. But this wasn't the case. It was anything but. And he traced the problem down to language. And suddenly, the dream felt within reach. He began constructing Esperanto, which he took roots of major European languages such as Spanish, German, and English. But what does Esperanto mean? Can anyone give a guess? No one? Okay. It means hopeful, or one who hopes. And what I really like about that is the early learners of Esperanto really did hope. They hoped for a peaceful future and a future of hope. Keep in mind, this is the late 1800s, right before World War I. But it never took off, Esperanto. It only has 2 million speakers today. But why is that? Well, before that, what exactly is a universal language? A universal language is a language used widespread, understood by most or all of the population. They can be either constructed or natural. For example, a natural language is German, and a constructed language is Esperanto. And here are some examples of text from Esperanto. But there's another term used to describe some languages. They are similar but not the same. These are cosmopolitan languages. Cosmopolitan languages are most commonly formed when large languages evolve to become a bridge to connect local dialects. For example, Latin. Latin was not very many people's mother tongue. It was just a bridge. For example, maybe you spoke Bulgarian and maybe you spoke French, but you could both understand each other because you both spoke Latin. Same thing for classical Arabic and same thing for Sanskrit. English, I would say, is the closest thing we have to a universal language, despite only being third in native speakers. Chinese, which is first, is not close to being a universal language, for the fact that almost all of its speakers are located in China and Taiwan. Spanish, which is second, is a lot more widespread, being spoken in Central and South America, but again, majority of its speakers are native. But English is different. English is different for the fact that it only has 450 million native speakers. That may seem like a lot, like a population of USA, Canada, and Great Britain. But what's even more interesting is the amount of people that speak English in total as a second or third language. Some sources say that number is up to 2 billion. Quickly, this picture is the British Empire at its peak. And most of these languages today speak English as a language. But what is the urge to learn this language? Because English has a power in the fact it is almost universally considered the language of business and trade. Now that is a huge title, the language of business and trade, 1 in 7,000 languages. And that means if you learn English, you are able to talk and do business on such a wider scale. And the more people that learn English, the more appealing it becomes, and the more people that learn it, and so on. A good analogy I like to use is all the languages are people swimming in a pool. While they look like they're swimming There's actually 7,000 of them in there, and they're drowning. In order to stick your head above the water, you need to place your hands on others' shoulders and push them down. This graph here is showing the value of trade in comparison to the total world GDP. You can see here there's a sharp increase in trade after 1940s, after the Second World War. Keep that in mind. But why is there a need for a global language, a business language? Well, it all boils down to one word: globalization. 200 years ago, I had no reason to learn, let's say, Chinese because I'm not going to go to China for business. But the Industrial Revolution and growing trade changed that. Suddenly, maybe I have a reason to learn Chinese because the Chinese GDP is 9 times higher than our own. Or maybe they want to learn English. This graph here is showing the language deaths per year, and you can see I've separated it into 2 sections: colonization and globalization. The first section, colonization, is still during a period of time where a large power would find new land, knock out the people's culture, and claim it as their own. But the second part, globalization, these language deaths are caused by trade. And you can see here there's a sharp increase in language deaths after 1940. Going back, you can see here there's a direct correlation between a huge increase in trade and a huge increase in languages being lost. And that, I believe, is people thinking their small languages are obsolete and not teaching it to their own children. Conflicts between cultures are not new. For example, in 1831, the first church-run residential school opened. It's called the Mohawk Institute. And these children were taken away from their parents, and the parents had no idea what was happening to their child. It looked like a normal school, but inside it was anything but. Now, a quick raise of hands. Who here is a parent? Okay. What? Your child. Okay, parents, this shouldn't be too hard because they already take 101% of your time, but think about your child. Okay, and now imagine your child was taken away from you. And in a period between 1 month and 12 years, you saw them again. And when you saw them again, if you saw them again, they were completely a different person. Their hair, you had never seen anything like it. Their clothes, they seemed completely alien to you. And their language, they didn't even speak the language you gave them because when they did, they had needles stuck in their tongue. And your child, you're not even sure if you can call them that. They are completely alien to you. And this was the reality for 150,000 families across Canada. Now, some of you may think that the last residential school closed before the 80s. But actually, the last residential school was operational until 1996, which is 27 years ago. But while I'm glad those atrocities are over, there are similar tragedies happening all over the world right now. For example, the Uyghurs. Some of you may know of them. They're a Muslim group in northwestern China. And since 2014, they have reportedly been prosecuted and brought to concentration camps, where they're stripped of their language, their culture, and their traditions. And some have even been sterilized to stop the growth of Muslims in China. And these aren't just children. These are adults and elderly too. This is everyone. But why is taking away someone's language so important for colonization? Well, it's because language is a weapon. A weapon. How could a language be a weapon? It is a weapon for the fact that if you take away someone's language and replace it with your own, you are taking away their culture and their identity. And if you can do that, you can control them. Weaponized language doesn't threaten to kill you. No, it threatens to kill who you are. Many people generally consider language and culture to be interlinked. A huge part of culture is a unique identity, and a language gives you that. For example, it could be so that the only difference between a group living here and a group living here could be while they have almost very similar traditions, they could speak completely different languages. And going back to my title, The Veins of Culture and the Impacts of a Universal Language, what exactly are the veins of culture? Well, the veins of culture are something so intertied with culture that culture would not be able to exist without it. And what is that? Well, it's language. Language is the veins of culture because if you, like I said before, if you take away someone's language, you are taking away their culture as well. Wade Davis, a Canadian anthropologist, ethnobotanist, and author, he wrote a book. The book is called The Wayfinders, and in that he explores the story of many indigenous groups across the world. But in the beginning, he wrote, and I quote, "There are those who quite innocently ask, wouldn't the world be a better place if we all spoke one language?" And my favorite response to that is to say, a wonderful idea, but let's make that universal language Yoruba, Inuktitut, or San. And suddenly, people get an idea what it would be like to not be able to speak their own language. End quote. And that is why Esperanto never took off. It's because it's essentially taking the language that makes us unique and throwing it out the window. In the beginning of this project, I really did like the idea of Esperanto. I even started learning it. But Wade Davis, in my interview with him, referred to Esperanto and similar universal languages as the equivalent of a cultural nerve gas. This section is relatively short, but its purpose is important. There are over 7,000 languages in the world, and over half of them are not being taught to children. If that is 3,500 languages gone in 50 years, that is a language gone every 5 days. And keep in mind, every single one of these languages has unique wisdom, traditions, and history. Going back to my analogy, these are the languages that every 5 days feel the boot on their shoulder, pushing them into the murky depths. This graph here is showing the largest languages by speakers. You can see English, Chinese, Hindi, and Spanish as the top 4. And just these 9 languages hold 61% of the world's population. That means the majority of the world speaks these as their main language. But what are others doing to solve this? UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, has put in a program. It's called the Indigenous Languages Decade. And this decade urges all countries of the UN to put in programs to ensure indigenous peoples' essential right to preserve, promote, and revitalize their language. This graph here is showing the percent of indigenous people who learned in indigenous languages either as a first or second language. You see males on the left and females on the right. The bars represent the percent of people who learned it as a first language, and the lines represent as a second language. You can see here a huge increase in the youth learning indigenous languages, and that means all isn't lost. But what can you do? Well, you can donate. You can donate to awesome organizations such as 7,000 Languages or the Endangered Languages Fund. You can also volunteer your time. Right there is a link to volunteer your time with 7,000 Languages. And another thing you can do is actually learn some of the languages so you can help preserve them. And lastly, what I think is the most important thing you can do is discuss. Discuss your new information, what you've learned, to your family and friends. The more people who know about this issue, the more likely there is to be change to give all of these languages a more hopeful future. Thank you. I would like to give special thanks to Wade Davis, Yvonne Kushamerwa, and Jonathan Yazida for accepting to be interviewed and not only giving me their opinion, but also their story and their knowledge, whether that be their experience around the world or their decades of research. And not only that, giving me new ideas to talk about and giving my project a lot more life. I'd also like to thank Julie Langlois and Anne Murphy. for staying up, correcting my billions of spelling errors, and also grammar, as well as guiding me through the end and not letting me procrastinate. Also, I'd like to give special thanks to my parents, Lori and Tim Bekhuys. I would like to thank you guys for not letting me crash and burn, as well, instead letting me present to you, and I'd like to thank you guys for your light criticism. Love you. Okay, and lastly, I'd like to give thanks to Jen for not only preventing me from playing chess in class, but also letting everyone in the grade 9 class do this project. Thank you.
Mr. Bekhuys. You actually have questions and answers.
This is my least favorite part. Okay.
It may not be your least favorite part, but you have a lot of knowledge about this topic, and I know from reading your paper, which is incredible, but also having you present this from your heart, and I know the changes that came through the process, and I really appreciate your perseverance to, I think, a really clear idea of what you wanted. And it was quite a journey, so I'm sure we're going to get into that more, but I'm happy to. So, questions? Go ahead, Julie.
Mr. Bekhuys, well done. This was a year. You and I went through these hard challenges and topic switches and incredible day today. So thank you for that. However, I think that everybody here needs to know, you said it in your presentation, but what was the deciding factor? What was the moment when you decided you were so gung-ho on Esperanto? And you were learning it, you were speaking it, you had everything in this topic. And then you decided, wait a minute, Esperanto actually has a lot of challenges and issues and power imbalances. When did that come apparent to you, and why did you decide to take it a whole other pathway?
Excellent question. I think that was when I started to research more into the linkage of language and culture. Like I said, if you take away someone's culture, their language goes with it. And when I thought about Esperanto, I just thought, like Wade Davis's quote, the cultural nerve gas, it'd just be wiping out people's cultures as well. So that was the turning point for me.
Amazing, well done.
And do you have a question as an advisor?
Actually, that was my question. But I guess I'll ask, like, intellectually, how did that feel? Because, when you're researching, it's great when you change your direction because you've actually found something that counters what you went in thinking. And I guess I just wanted you to reflect on that because that's the best part of doing research, is actually realizing you were wrong. And I just wondered how that felt.
Well, it wasn't like a snap overnight. It was more gradual. And it started with me, I guess, I started to lose interest in Esperanto just a bit. And that's actually a really good question. I'm not really sure how that felt intellectually, but it must have been like, okay, I've pretty much done a quarter of my project on something I no longer feel love towards. So it was definitely interesting, I would say.
Congratulations.
That's huge growth. Lori, can you just speak loudly or stand up because the microphone's right here?
Sure. Hayden, wonderful job.
Sorry, Mr.
Oh,
Bekhuys.
Mr. Bekhuys. Very sorry, Mr. Bekhuys. My question is, I wanted to get a better understanding of the influence of the people that you interviewed. Are you able to summarize a little bit about what those people, where they were from and what they taught you?
Okay. Well, we have Wade Davis. He spent a lot of his life researching, as he's an ethnobotanist and, of course, anthropologist. So he brought a lot on the intellectual and research side a lot to my project. And then we have Jonathan Uzita. He spent most of his life in Mexico, and that was my first interview, and he was completely awesome. Really chill dude. And lastly, we have Yvonne Kushamerwa. She spent most of her life in, I believe, Rwanda and Uganda. And she spoke, I believe, 5 languages. And talking with her was also, amazing. She brought a lot more life and insight into my project. Does that answer your question?
Lots of questions from the floor. Mr. Olson, come on up.
Mr. Bekhuys, incredible presentation. I must ask, would you think it would be a good idea for those who only know one language to learn another?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not forcing you to learn any language, right? But what I've always thought would be cool was to learn some snippets of indigenous languages. Of course, to help the preservation effort. But, the more languages you know, the better, I guess.
Ms. Mary Tess?
Mr. Bekhuys, phenomenal job. This is such an exciting topic, and I don't know why I just realized now, but everything you were talking about here is like what I'm studying in my master's. So I don't know how we didn't connect over this sooner, but I have so many questions for you because of that. I'll keep it to one. Did you do any specific studying into language revitalization in Canada, say, for example?
Not a huge amount, but I do know that Canada has completely embraced the program set in place by the United Nations.
Okay, yeah, because there's a lot of Indigenous communities in Canada that are teaching their Indigenous languages as a first language to children when they start school, and then slowly introducing English later on, which is kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, which probably would, like the graph I showed, the huge increase in
Exactly,
the
yeah.
indigenous
Super
languages.
Cool. Great job.
Thank you.
Mr. Seward?
Mr. Bekhuys, that was a wonderful presentation. Early on, you talked about how there have been an increase in language deaths and our efforts to prevent that. If we aren't able to prevent that, do you think it'll lead to a universal language eventually?
I'd say eventually in a large period of time, but I think it will just result in the, dissolution of smaller languages, leaving maybe 10 to 20 larger languages. And I don't feel like those top 20, 30, 40 languages are at risk. Say Russian and Chinese, right, German, those languages I do not believe are at risk at all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tammy, come on up.
Uh-oh.
Tough crowd.
Mr. Bekhuys, excellent presentation and also excellent topic, my favorite. This question is dedicated to you. How do you see coding languages evolving as universal languages?
I wouldn't say as a universal language, but there's a recent thing I learned is that no language really forces you to use its alphabet. So you could actually write in English using any alphabet, like the Greek or Russian. So it would be cool to see in attempts at languages being written through coding languages, but I don't see any potential of a coding language becoming a universal language. That would be interesting.
It would be interesting. Also, do you think it's I noticed that people who live in Europe tend to speak multiple languages more often than people in Canada and people born in the US and Canada. Obviously, immigrants speak other languages, but do you think that is a disadvantage? How would that be a disadvantage for Canadians who generally speak 1 or 2 languages? That's really unfair to say. But less languages. Do you think that's a problem for Canada or Canadians?
I mean, I wouldn't say so. I mean, Canada is, around the same size as Europe. So, of course, there's a lot of languages in small proximity, so you're bound to have huge amounts of overlap to that. But I wouldn't see it as a disadvantage, but, there are many Canadians who speak plenty of languages, but and I guess we already have programs for Canadians to learn French or in Quebec to learn English. So I don't see it as a huge problem.
Thank you. Excellent.
Hannah, come on up.
Well done, Mr. Bekhuys. I was just wondering, you were talking about all the languages that are dying or that have died, is there any, like, if you could preserve one of them, if you could bring one of them back, which language would you choose?
That question requires a lot of bias because, there's, like I said, if there's a language gone every 5 days, how am I supposed to pick one and save it? So I can't really think of an extinct language that I would like to bring back more than any other ones. I want to bring them all back personally. Yeah.
Adrian.
Mr. Bekhuys, I've known you for a little while, and you have proven once again how thoughtful and critically minded you are. This was a fascinating topic and a very well presented presentation. My question to you is, what defines a language? I mean, is math a language? Is music a language? To me, those seem like universal languages in a way, but are they really a language, and what defines that?
Oh, well, I can't really decide the definition of a language. I mean, Wikipedia is there for that. I guess if you can communicate using math, I think that could be a language in some aspects. Yeah, I mean, I don't see them as a full-fledged language like math or science, but I guess some people could consider them a language because you can communicate with it.
Right. So as long as you can convey some sort of meaning, it could be a language?
I guess that's my definition of a language.
Great definition. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that because Adrian mentioned music, and I'm curious where you think music fits in that, and thinking more of emotions.
I mean, music can convey, like you said, emotions really well. It can also convey a message with a really good director. I wouldn't see music as a language, but I do see it as an excellent way of, I guess, conveying emotions and feelings without language.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bekhuys. Your presentation really was emotionally stirring to me, and I really want to thank you for that. The part that triggered for me was your, asking the audience who's a parent, and you're imagining or asking us to imagine that moment where someone takes a child away. And I think that's really important in our space here in Canada because this is, what happened. And it was directly related to language and culture, which is the vein you talked about there. So thanks for that. And then my question is, as we Canadians struggle with this, how do you feel about the fact that there's so many Indigenous languages out there, and here we are in the Squamish territory, and we try to acknowledge that. And I'm curious if through your research you had any additional thoughts you could share about indigeneity and the languages of Canada. Through that, maybe discussions you had or talks. Anything else about how Canada has stifled and killed languages that are Indigenous to this space?
Well, personally, I am quite proud that most Indigenous languages still exist. Sadly, I did I did have an opportunity, but kind of flunked that one. I had an opportunity to interview an Indigenous person, but that kind of fell through. I'm not really sure about the core of the question, but if you're asking how I feel about the fact that there's still languages left, I feel really great about that, and I see that I'm looking at that really hopefully.
Right. So you're upbeat on the fact that there's a resurgence of commitment to Indigenous languages. Yeah,
extremely
good feeling. Thank you.
Well done, Mr. Bekhuys. It was very easy to understand. Your presentation was amazing. I have two questions for you. The first question is if you could choose any language, not in the top 30 languages that kind of hidden away that should be brought out and recognized, what language would you choose to learn?
I'd say definitely a more localized Indigenous language, maybe Squamish. I'm not sure if Squamish is a language, but
It is, yeah.
okay, well, definitely like a localized indigenous language.
Very cool. Second question for you is kind of relating to Tammy's question is like instead of coding, like ASL, like as for deaf people, not ASL, but like sign language is like, because there's like Spanish sign language and there's
American.
American. So where do you think that fits in for culture? Like if you were to speak ASL and that was like taken away, like could ASL be, or like sign language be a universal language as well?
I kind of consider, I guess, the sign language. I kind of consider sign language almost attached to the the language it's attached to, like Spanish sign language. I kind of consider interlinked with Spanish. So if you're asking for the culture behind those, I guess Spanish ASL would probably be linked with Spanish, and sign language as a universal language. That is actually a very interesting thought. I mean, it's language without having to hurt your throat. I doubt it would become a universal language, but I do not doubt the possibility of eventual universal sign language for people who are deaf.
Come here, come on.
Hello, Mr. Bekhuys. Great presentation. Do you think Esperanto is a language that should be taken seriously?
I mean, with its 2 million speakers and its few thousand native speakers, I'd say yes, but like not like praising it. Oh, Esperanto. Its idea was good. It had a really good idea and language for everyone. But of course, like any great idea, it of course has some flaws. So I feel like it should have the respect of any other language. But I don't feel like it deserves praise more than any other language as well.
Mr. Bekhuys, did you come across any other languages besides Esperanto that were attempting to be a universal language?
That was a point of research on my earlier project, like the project before I became more of the impacts of universal language and language and culture. It was before that. It was more focused on the essence of a universal language. So I was going to do some research. I know others exist. I know some use hieroglyphs and some use different alphabets, but I cannot think of the name of it.
Mr. Lee.
Great, well-rounded presentation, Mr. Bekhuys. I really enjoyed every aspect of it. I have 2 questions for you. One question is, do you think it is inevitable that humans develop multiple languages? And do you think, and this is still the first question, and do you think that multiple languages, the development of multiple languages is evolutionary advantageous, or take it to the modern day world, advantageous for like evolution, or
business?
And also like evolution, is it evolution, multiple languages evolutionarily advantageous, and also evolution, and also just advantageous for the modern world?
I could actually say no. This may, the idea of one language was for everyone to be peaceful. And, of course, there are still rivalries between cultures, right? And some of that may be caused by different languages. Well, like, at least not caused by it, but, part of it. So, theoretically, there would be maybe some less conflict if we all spoke one language, but of course that has drawbacks. So I'd say, that's a hard question, but I'd say maybe not. Large amount of languages is advantageous, but I don't think it's a huge difference.
Okay, thank you very much. My second question is, do you think animals speak different languages? Like dolphins on one side of the world speak a different language, while on the other side of the world speak another language?
Apparently cows have accents, depending on where they grow up. But I'd say, I'm not sure how many species on Earth can support the idea of language, let alone multiple. But I'm not sure. I'm personally not an animal. Actually, I am, but I wouldn't have an answer to that. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Beyond the scope of the research.
That's
Anne, go ahead.
Thanks. And again, I'll add to everyone how wonderful your presentation was. And I guess following up on a couple of these questions, especially the last one, second to last one, isn't linguistic diversity inevitable? Because, and isn't the idea of universal actually ultimately impossible? And I'll give you the example of English, right? So you have English spoken in Edinburgh, English spoken in Jamaica, you have English spoken here. And at some point, you know, they're really, really different, right? And isn't it the case that with these large languages that there comes a time where it turns into another language, right? And that's what languages do.
Yeah, I mean, I forget the name of the language, but there is an island in the Caribbean, I forget the name of the island, where it was colonized by the French, but over time they kind of mixed in French with their localized language. And if you were to bring men from there and bring men from French, they wouldn't be able to understand each other very well. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess people with different cultures want their own unique identity, and language gives them that. So I guess languages are inevitably going to evolve. So if there actually was a universal language, I'm not sure how long that would last. With different, like the world is huge and everyone has their own interpretation of language.
Jared.
Yeah. Mr. Bekhuys, well done. This is such a complex and difficult topic, and you know, if there's one thing I know of you, having you as an English student for years, and you go down a rabbit hole and you really go down it, and you think about all of the different kinds of implications and details, and you tend to think critically. So a philosophical question for you: where exactly does culture give birth, or rather language give birth to culture? Like continuously. Is it true that if you like translate a very basic concept, like a color from French to English, you lose and gain something by doing that? And is that what informs culture, or where does that come from? What does that come from?
Are you asking like, I kept having a hard time finding the core of that question. Is it like at what point, like, does language make culture, or?
Yeah, are we just translating concepts directly, or does it lose something when it comes from one idea to another? What do you think of that?
Or asking if ideas get lost through language, like if I'm speaking English to you and you know French. Okay. I'm not sure how many, if that's your question, how many ideas are lost by translation?
Yeah, like, is an idea in one language, if you translate it directly to another language, is it the exact same, or is it sort of different in the different ways of thinking about it through language?
It depends on the language, I would say. Some languages are similar, so you may get a better translation over that idea. But like some languages just don't even have words to describe a topic. Like English is one of the only languages in the world with a word for the day after tomorrow, overmorrow. And so overmorrow translated, let's say, into Russian would be a lot longer and I guess a lot less accurate. Well, I mean, maybe a bit less accurate of the actual idea.
Yeah, great answer. Okay, Nisha, go ahead.
Amazing presentation, Mr. Bekhuys. My question is kind of related to Julia's first one. But first off, do you speak any languages besides English? And if not, would you try to learn a new language, and what language would it be?
I speak English. I speak some French, thanks to Carrie. I also speak a minimal amount of Esperanto, thanks to Duolingo. But that's on what I call vacation or pause. I haven't been learning Esperanto much lately, and I might try again. I kind of lost, I guess some of the interest was lost when I lost my 50-day streak on Duolingo. That was a bummer. Yeah, I speak some French and small amounts of Esperanto.